The HOA president thought she could humiliate a new homeowner by calling the police, but she never expected to be silenced by one powerful piece of identification. You don't expect your first day in a new home to feel like a courtroom. But that's exactly what happened to Alyssa Trenholm the moment her moving truck turned onto the curved street of Desert Bloom Drive in Scottsdale, Arizona. 15 years of service in the Air Force had taught her how to handle pressure, how to remain calm when others cracked. She'd been stationed in places where the sound of jets and helicopters rattled windows. She'd learned to adapt, to read people, and to carry herself with quiet strength. But none of that prepared her for what waited in this seemingly quiet neighborhood of stucco homes and manicured lawns. The sun was hot against the windshield as Alyssa guided the truck to the curb. She cut the engine, took a deep breath, and glanced at the 2-story townhouse she had worked so hard to purchase. To her, it wasn't just a building with beige siding and a red-tiled roof. It was proof of everything she had earned: stability, independence, and the promise of peace after years of sacrifice. Her younger sister, Keisha, followed behind in a small SUV, honking once in celebration. Alyssa laughed and waved, rolling her shoulders to shake off the tension of the long drive from Luke Air Force Base. "Home, sweet home," she whispered, even though she knew she'd have to unpack a mountain of boxes before it could feel like hers. As she hopped down from the truck, Keisha parked and came over with a grin. "You ready to haul all this inside?" "Not really," Alyssa chuckled, "but I've done harder things." They shared a smile, the kind of light moment only siblings could spark, before Alyssa turned to grab the first box. That's when she heard it, the sharp sound of heels striking pavement. From the corner of her eye, a figure marched across the street, a woman in her late 60s, tall, with a posture that suggested authority. Her hair was stiffly curled, her blouse buttoned all the way up despite the heat, and her face, set in stone, like she was approaching an enemy instead of a neighbor. "Excuse me," the woman barked, her voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. "What are you doing here?" Keisha froze, looking at Alyssa. Alyssa tightened her grip on the box and turned slowly, meeting the stranger's stare. "I'm moving in," Alyssa said evenly. "This is my home." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Your home? That's impossible. I know everyone in this community. I'm the HOA president." "You must be mistaken." Alyssa set the box down on the truck bed and crossed her arms. She wasn't used to being challenged like this, in civilian life, at least not within 30 minutes of arriving somewhere. "I'm not mistaken," she replied. "The house is mine. Paper signed, keys in my pocket." The woman planted herself at the end of the driveway, hands on her hips. "What's your name?" "Alyssa Trenholm," she said, keeping her voice steady. The woman squinted at her like the name itself didn't match the face standing in front of her. Keisha finally spoke up, irritation flashing across her expression. "Is there a problem here?" "She just bought the house." "There's absolutely a problem," the woman shot back. "People can't just appear here. We have standards, rules. This is private property, and if you don't belong here, I will call the police." The words landed heavy. Alyssa felt heat rising in her chest, but forced herself to breathe. She'd dealt with confrontation before, on deployments, in high-pressure negotiations, in situations where one wrong move could set everything spiraling. She wasn't going to let a stranger in a crisp blouse dictate the tone of her new beginning. "Ma'am," Alyssa said carefully, "I belong here." "You'll see that soon enough." But the woman, who had yet to even introduce herself, didn't back down. She pulled a phone from her purse and began tapping the screen with sharp, deliberate movements. Keisha leaned closer to Alyssa and muttered, "Is she serious?" "Oh, she's serious," Alyssa said quietly. She had learned long ago that silence could sometimes speak louder than words. Still, as Geraldine snapped her phone shut and glared at her, Alyssa felt the weight of something she hadn't expected. Not here, not in this community she thought she'd finally belong to. But what she didn't know yet was that this confrontation was only the beginning, and the real test of her patience was about to arrive, with flashing lights. Geraldine didn't leave after hanging up with the police. She stood there at the edge of the driveway like she was guarding a national landmark, her chin lifted higher, her expression locked in determination. It was as if she expected Alyssa to crumble, to admit defeat before the patrol cars even arrived. Alyssa bent down, grabbed a smaller box from the truck, and carried it toward the front door. She refused to give Geraldine the satisfaction of watching her stall. But every step she took, She could feel eyes on her, neighbors behind blinds, a kid on a bike slowing down to listen, a man watering his lawn with the hose held just a little too long in one spot. "Excuse me. I told you not to move anything inside," Geraldine snapped, her voice sharp. "You're interfering with a community that has strict oversight. That home was not approved for me?" Alyssa cut in, stopping in the middle of the walkway. The box rested against her hip. Her voice wasn't raised, but the firmness in it carried across the cul-de-sac. Geraldine blinked but didn't answer. Instead, she huffed, crossing her arms tighter. Keisha stepped forward, arms flying in exasperation. "Are you hearing yourself? She bought this place! She has the keys. You think she showed up here for fun? That truck doesn't rent itself." Geraldine ignored Keisha entirely, keeping her eyes pinned on Alyssa. "Do you have documentation?" she demanded. "Proof of purchase? A deed? Anything at all?" Alyssa set the box on the ground gently, brushing her hands off against her jeans. She reached into her back pocket, pulled out the house keys, and dangled them with a faint jingle. "This is all the proof I need today. The rest is in a folder inside that SUV, but honestly, you have no right to demand it. You're not law enforcement." The silence that followed was tense, broken only by the hiss of sprinklers from a yard down the street. Geraldine's face flushed pink, but she didn't budge. "You're out of line," Keisha muttered under her breath. But Geraldine raised her voice for everyone to hear. "I have lived in this community for 32 years. I've overseen every transaction, every event, every improvement. I know who belongs and who doesn't, and I'm telling you, this is irregular. We have procedures." Alyssa's jaw tightened, but she inhaled deeply, her training kicking in. She had been in enough confrontations to know when someone wanted escalation. Geraldine thrived on control, and Alyssa wasn't about to hand her that satisfaction. "Mrs. Pruitt," Alyssa said finally, placing deliberate weight on the name, "I'm not here to disrupt your little kingdom. I'm here because I earned this. I worked, I saved, I signed the papers. This is my house. Now you'll have to learn to accept it." That should have been the end of it. But instead, Geraldine smirked. "We'll see what the officers think. I can assure you they'll be very interested in your explanation." The words carried a sharp undertone Alyssa recognized immediately. She'd heard it before, in different forms, in different parts of the country. That condescending tone that suggested she was already guilty of something, even when she wasn't. Keisha muttered, "This is ridiculous. She's acting like you broke in through the window." "Let her," Alyssa whispered back. "It'll only prove what this is really about." Minutes dragged on. Geraldine didn't move from her post. Neighbors whispered to each other from driveways, some shaking their heads, others looking away. The atmosphere wasn't just uncomfortable. It was building toward something heavier, like the whole street was waiting for a verdict. Alyssa grabbed another box and carried it to the door. She unlocked it, swung it open, and stepped inside, letting the air-conditioned coolness wash over her. For a brief second, she allowed herself to smile. She had crossed the threshold. No matter what Geraldine thought, this was her home. When she came back out, Geraldine's voice sliced through the air again. "You're making a mistake ignoring me." For the first time, Geraldine hesitated. She opened her mouth to fire back but stopped, pressing her lips together instead. Her eyes darted toward the end of the street, where the faint sound of sirens began to echo. Keisha shook her head. "Here we go." The sound grew louder, bouncing between the houses until blue and red lights flickered across the stucco walls. 2 patrol cars rolled in, their presence drawing even more neighbors outside. Alyssa's pulse quickened, but her posture stayed steady. She had faced worse. She wasn't about to fold under the weight of suspicion. But as the cars slowed to a stop, she realized that the real confrontation hadn't even started yet. The officers would decide how this story went, at least for the moment. The wail of sirens had faded, but the flashing lights still danced against the stucco walls of Desert Bloom Drive. The 2 patrol cars sat idling at the curb, doors shut, engines humming. The officers hadn't stepped out yet, and that wait stretched like elastic. Every second felt longer than the last. Geraldine straightened her blouse, clearly preparing to deliver her side of the story, her chin lifted as though she was rehearsing lines for an audience. Alyssa caught the flicker of excitement in her eyes, like she'd been waiting years for a moment where her authority would be validated. Meanwhile, Alyssa leaned against the truck, arms folded, keys still in her hand. Keisha paced near the SUV, muttering, "I swear, Alyssa, if they come over here and treat you like you don't belong—" "They might," Alyssa said calmly, "but I'll handle it. Don't step in unless I ask you to." Keisha threw her hands up. "You want me to just stand here while this woman rewrites reality? She called the cops like you broke into your own house." "I know," Alyssa replied, "but I've been through bigger storms than Geraldine Pruitt." She forced her shoulders to stay loose, but inside, her thoughts spun. This wasn't just about a house. This was about dignity, and whether the people around her, the ones whispering, watching, judging, would see her for who she really was. Across the street, neighbors had gathered in clusters. A teenager leaned against a car with his phone out, already recording. An older couple sat on lawn chairs, their arms crossed. A woman whispered something to her husband, who only shrugged. It was as if the entire neighborhood had turned into a silent jury. Keisha exhaled hard. "Look at them. Not one person came over to say hello. They're just waiting to see if you get dragged away." "That's their choice," Alyssa said, her voice carrying the weight of control she didn't always feel. "I know the truth. That's enough for me right now." But inside, her stomach twisted. She had led units overseas, mediated conflicts, dealt with angry civilians in foreign countries. Yet here in Arizona, on the driveway of her own home, she felt the sting of being measured, doubted, questioned. Finally, one of the car doors opened. A tall officer stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses. His partner followed, jotting something on a notepad before sliding it into his pocket. Geraldine immediately sprang into action, striding toward them like she had called reinforcements to a battle she had been winning. "There they are," she said dramatically. "Thank goodness you came quickly. We've got a serious problem here." Alyssa caught the faint eye roll from Keisha and held up a hand. "Not yet," she whispered. Geraldine launched into her version of events, pointing directly at Alyssa as if she were a suspect on trial. She showed up with a truck, started unloading boxes into a home that doesn't belong to her. "I'm the HOA president. I know who lives here, who buys property, who rents. I know every file. She's not on any of them." The officers listened without interruption. One of them, a shorter man with graying hair at his temples, nodded occasionally but didn't write anything down. When Geraldine finally paused, out of breath, the taller officer turned toward Alyssa. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "can you tell me what's going on here?" Alyssa pushed off the side of the truck and walked forward with steady steps. Her boots pressed against the warm pavement. She stopped a few feet from them, her tone clear and respectful. "What's going on is simple. I bought this house. I closed last week. My name is on the deed. I have the keys in my pocket, the documents in that SUV, and a moving truck full of my belongings." "That's it," Geraldine scoffed. "That's her story, but she can't prove it. She's trespassing, and I want her removed immediately." Keisha gasped. Her words floated in the air, and Alyssa could feel every eye on her, waiting. She slid her thumb over the edge of her wallet, ready. She wasn't just proving ownership. She was about to make Geraldine swallow every word she'd thrown like daggers. But before she opened it, she decided to let the silence stretch just a little longer, because sometimes the pause before the truth lands is louder than the truth itself. The silence didn't last long. Alyssa slid her military ID from the leather fold of her wallet and held it between two fingers. The Arizona sun glinted against the plastic, making the lettering shine. She didn't rush. She extended her arms slowly toward the taller officer, her face composed, her movements deliberate. He stepped forward and took it without hesitation, lowering his sunglasses to read. His partner leaned closer, both men scanning the card. Alyssa could see their eyes move across the details. Trenholm, Alyssa Renee. Rank, Technical Sergeant. Branch, United States Air Force. Years of service, 15. The taller officer's expression softened almost instantly. He glanced back at Alyssa, then at Geraldine. "This is valid," he said, "and it matches the name she gave us." For the first time, Geraldine's confidence cracked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Keisha folded her arms and let out a low laugh. "Guess that wasn't the answer you wanted, huh?" "Ma'am," the shorter officer said, turning toward Geraldine. "Now, do you have any evidence to suggest this homeowner doesn't belong here? A deed in your files? An HOA record that contradicts her claim?" Geraldine stammered. "Well, no, not on me, but I know what's right." I've overseen this community for decades. I've never seen her name. The taller officer handed the ID back to Alyssa. That's not how this works. She has legal identification and a military record to match. Unless you have hard evidence of a crime, we're done here. The words landed with weight. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered shifted slightly, whispers rippling across driveways. Some people turned away, embarrassed. Others leaned in, curious to see what Geraldine would say next. Alyssa tucked her ID back into her wallet with quiet precision. Then she lifted her eyes, steady and direct. I told you this was my home. I've got the closing documents if you'd like to see them, but it seems unnecessary now. The shorter officer gave a small nod. That won't be needed, ma'am. You're clear. Geraldine's cheeks burned red, but she wasn't done. Wait, you don't understand. This community has standards. We've had problems before. Problems like what? Alyssa interrupted, her tone sharper than before. The crowd hushed, waiting. Geraldine opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted toward the officers, hoping for backup, but neither man moved. Ma'am, the taller officer said firmly, we're not here to enforce HOA preferences. We're here to address actual crimes. And there is no crime here. The kid with the phone finally spoke up from across the street. Looks like she just made a fool of herself. His voice carried farther than he realized, and several neighbors chuckled nervously. Geraldine spun toward him, eyes narrowing. This isn't funny. Respect your elders. But the laughter had already punctured the air of authority she clung to. Alyssa stepped forward, her voice low but clear. You tried to humiliate me in front of an entire neighborhood. You called the police on me like I was a criminal. And for what? Because I didn't fit into the picture you had in your head? Geraldine swallowed hard. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't answer. Keisha couldn't hold back anymore. She thought she could shame you out of your own driveway, but all she did was prove she doesn't know who she's dealing with. The taller officer glanced at Alyssa. Do you want us to file a report? Document what happened? Alyssa considered it. Filing a report might put Geraldine's actions on record, but it could also stir the pot further. After a beat, she shook her head. Not today. I just want to move into my home without being treated like a trespasser. The patrol cars hadn't even pulled away when Geraldine tried to regain her footing. She smoothed her blouse, straightened her shoulders, and forced her voice to carry again. But this time, it wavered. Neighbors, she called out, scanning the faces lined along porches and driveways. Don't be fooled. Just because someone flashes an ID doesn't mean they belong here. We have protocols, standards. Her words didn't land the way she expected. A few heads turned away. A man shook his head slowly. A mother holding her toddler whispered to her husband and walked back inside. Alyssa stood at the foot of her driveway, box in hand, watching Geraldine spin. She had dealt with people like this before. People who couldn't admit when they were wrong, who doubled down even when the truth stared them in the face. Protocols? Alyssa said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I've followed protocols my entire adult life. Do you want me to list them? Deployment clearances, chain of command, security checks that go deeper than you can imagine. And now you want to lecture me about neighborhood standards? The crowd went still. Geraldine opened her mouth but found no words. Keisha clapped her hands once, sarcastically. Tell her, Liz. The taller officer, who hadn't left yet, raised a hand. Ma'am, he said to Geraldine, enough. She's shown valid ID and we've confirmed there's no issue here. Let this woman move into her home in peace. But Geraldine wasn't ready to surrender. Her eyes flicked across the gathering, desperate for allies. You all know me, she insisted. I've kept this community safe, orderly. We don't let just anyone move in without review. You've trusted me for years. A neighbor finally spoke up, a young man with glasses standing near the edge of his lawn. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. We trusted you to be fair, Mrs. Pruitt, not to call the cops on someone for moving into a house they clearly bought. Murmurs of agreement rippled. Geraldine's face hardened. You don't understand? No, Alyssa interrupted. They understand perfectly. She stepped closer, the weight of her words pressing with each syllable. You saw a woman you didn't expect to see in this neighborhood. You assumed I didn't belong, and you tried to use your position to make that stick. But the truth doesn't bend to your assumptions. The air was thick. The kid with the phone zoomed in, catching every word. Neighbors leaned forward, caught between discomfort and fascination. Geraldine's voice cracked. I was only protecting the community. Alyssa let out a small, humorless laugh. From what? Cardboard boxes and a moving truck? Or from me? That question landed heavy. Silence spread like wildfire. Geraldine's lips pressed thin, her eyes darting as if searching for a way out. Keisha shook her head, muttering loud enough for others to hear. This is beyond embarrassing. The shorter officer finally closed his notepad and tucked it away. We're done here, he said firmly. There's no legal matter. He added, looking at Alyssa. Good luck with your move. Thank you, Alyssa replied, her voice steady. She turned back to Geraldine, her gaze sharp but calm. You wanted the officers to decide. They did. Now it's time you face what that means. For once, Geraldine didn't respond. Her eyes dropped, her posture wilted. Without the backing she expected, she suddenly looked smaller, diminished by the weight of her own actions. Alyssa bent to lift her box again, carrying it across the threshold. The cool air inside felt like victory. She set it down in the entryway, exhaled, and let her shoulders relax. She had won this moment not with anger, not with shouting, but with truth she carried in her wallet. But as she stepped back outside, her eyes swept over the faces still watching. She could see it, a mix of guilt, curiosity, and hesitation. Some neighbors looked away, ashamed they hadn't stepped in. Others gave faint nods, subtle acknowledgments that they saw her differently now. Geraldine lingered at the curb. The police cars finally rolled away, their lights fading as they turned the corner. The sound of the engines disappeared, but the tension they left behind clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Alyssa stood in her driveway, shoulders squared, scanning the neighbors who still lingered. Some shuffled awkwardly, pretending to busy themselves with sprinklers or sweeping already clean driveways. Others just stood there, arms folded, unwilling to leave until they saw how this scene would end. Keisha broke the silence first. Well, y'all got your show. You saw the truth. Any of you gonna say something now? Her words cut through the quiet like a blade. A few neighbors looked at their feet. One man cleared his throat but said nothing. It was the younger residents who moved first. The young man with glasses stepped forward from his lawn. Ma'am, he said to Alyssa, his tone respectful. Welcome to the neighborhood. I don't know what Mrs. Pruitt thought she was doing, but that's not how everyone feels. I just want you to know that. Alyssa gave him a small nod. Thank you. What's your name? Justin Adler, he replied. My wife and I moved in last year. We've seen how she operates. This isn't new. From another porch, a young couple with a toddler spoke up. The woman called out, She did the same thing to us. Different situation, but same tactics. She tried to make us feel like outsiders, too. Don't let her get to you. Geraldine, who was still planted at the curb, spun toward them. Excuse me? That's not true. I've always acted in the community's best interest. The husband raised an eyebrow. Calling the police on someone moving into their own home is not in anyone's best interest. A ripple of agreement spread among a few neighbors, but there were others who stayed silent, older residents who had lived under Geraldine's watch for decades. Their eyes were careful, their lips pressed shut. Their silence said enough. They weren't ready to oppose her openly. Keisha crossed her arms, shaking her head. See, Liz? Some people get it. Others would rather hide behind their curtains forever. Alyssa exhaled slowly, refusing to let anger take over. She looked out at the group, her voice calm but firm. I don't expect everyone here to welcome me with open arms today. But I do expect basic respect. I've lived my life by rules that demand accountability, discipline, and service. I've given 15 years of that service to this country. And now I want one simple thing, to live in my own house without being treated like an intruder. The words carried weight. A few people murmured agreement. The teenager with the phone lowered it finally, whispering, She's right, almost to himself. Geraldine's composure cracked again. She stepped forward, her voice sharp, almost pleading. You don't understand what's at stake. If we let one exception slide, the whole community could change. That's how neighborhoods lose their character. A hush fell. The phrase hung there, ugly in its implication. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. She took a deliberate step closer, closing the space between them. Character? You want to talk about character? Character is how you treat people when you think no one's watching. Character is about honesty, integrity, and fairness. What you showed today wasn't character, it was prejudice. Geraldine's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted to the faces around her, searching for someone to back her up. None spoke. Justin shook his head. "You crossed the line, Mrs. Pruitt. Big time." Even the older couple in the lawn chairs shifted uncomfortably. The woman finally muttered, "Maybe it went too far this time." Keisha's voice cut in, low but fierce. "Too far?" She called the cops like Alyssa was breaking and entering. That wasn't too far. That was humiliation on purpose. The weight of those words sank into the crowd. Some nodded, others avoided eye contact. Geraldine's authority, once unchallenged, was cracking. But deep down, Alyssa knew Geraldine's silence wouldn't last. Pride like hers doesn't dissolve overnight. It only looks for the next chance to strike. By the time the last of the police lights faded from memory, the street had settled into an uneasy quiet. A few neighbors still lingered outside, reluctant to retreat behind their doors. Geraldine hovered at the curb like a shadow, refusing to disappear. Alyssa could feel the eyes on her, the curiosity, the doubt, the cautious respect. She realized then that silence wouldn't be enough. Silence might protect her dignity in the moment, but it wouldn't change the story already forming in the whispers of this neighborhood. If she wanted to reshape that story, she had to speak. She placed the box she was holding back on the truck bed, wiped her palms against her jeans, and stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried in the dry Arizona air. "You've all watched what happened here today. You've seen the way it played out. But most of you don't know me, and maybe that's why it was so easy for someone else to tell you who I am, or who she thought I was." Heads turned toward her. Justin, the young man with glasses, nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. "My name is Alyssa Trenholm. I spent nearly 15 years in the United States Air Force. I've served overseas. I've worked long hours under pressure most people never see, and I've sacrificed birthdays, holidays, and moments with family so I could honor the oath I swore when I was 21 years old." Her words landed heavy. The young couple with the toddler glanced at each other, visibly moved. Even the teenager lowered his phone, for once, not recording but listening. Alyssa went on, her voice steady. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here because I wanted stability. I wanted a community. After years of moving base to base, deployment to deployment, I thought maybe I could finally put down roots. And this house, right there," she gestured toward the townhouse behind her, "is the first real chance I've had to do that." Keisha stood a few steps behind, pride written across her face. Alyssa's gaze shifted across the neighbors, letting her words sink in. "I don't expect you to know me yet, but what I do expect is to be treated with respect, to not have someone call the police because they've already decided I don't belong. That's not just insulting, it's dangerous. And I think you all know that." There was a long pause. The only sound was the faint spray of sprinklers down the street. Then Justin spoke. "She's right. That could have gone a lot worse, and it shouldn't have happened at all." The mother with the toddler added, "When we first moved in, Geraldine told us we had to prove ourselves. We brushed it off, but now I see the pattern." Geraldine snapped her head toward her. "That is not true. I've always upheld standards equally." "Equally?" Alyssa repeated, tilting her head. "Then why was I the one singled out before I even unpacked a box? You didn't ask for documents when Justin moved in. You didn't call the police when that couple down the street arrived with their truck. So what made me different, Geraldine?" The question hung in the air like a challenge no one could miss. Geraldine's face paled, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She had no answer, not one she could say out loud. Alyssa didn't press further. She let the silence do the work. She knew from years of service that sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. Finally, she turned back to the crowd. "I want to live here peacefully. I want to contribute. I want to be a neighbor in every sense of the word. But I won't stand quietly if I'm treated like less than that. I've faced too much, sacrificed too much to start bending now." The teenager, emboldened, nodded slightly. For years, Geraldine Pruitt had been the voice of Desert Bloom Drive. She wrote the newsletters, handed out violation notices, and ran meetings with a firmness that no one dared question. But standing there, clutching her purse strap while half the neighborhood listened to Alyssa instead of her, Geraldine felt something she hadn't felt in decades, the sting of being outnumbered. Her mouth opened as if to launch another speech, but nothing came out. The words caught in her throat. She could feel the eyes on her, some glaring, others quietly judging, all of them waiting to see what she would do next. Alyssa didn't let the silence stretch too long. You've had your say, Geraldine. Now everyone here has seen what you did with it. You called the police on me for moving into my own home. That's not leadership, that's fear. And the sad part is, you didn't even try to know who I was before you made that call. The sting in her words was undeniable. Geraldine's cheeks burned crimson. From the lawn chair across the street, the older woman who had stayed quiet all afternoon finally spoke. Maybe Alyssa's right. Maybe we've all let you run things too long without questioning it. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't stop her. Geraldine whipped her head around, stunned. I've kept this community orderly for 32 years. Don't you dare act like I've done it for myself. Justin stepped in, his voice calm but steady. No one's denying you've put in work. But order doesn't mean treating people unfairly. This isn't the first time you've gone too far. It's just the first time the rest of us watched it play out in full daylight. Whispers flared again. A neighbor in a baseball cap muttered, "He's right, though," then quickly looked down at his shoes. Geraldine tried to gather herself. She lifted her chin, gripping her purse tighter. You think you understand what it takes to run a community? You don't. I've dealt with complaints, with late fees, with property disputes. I've put in hours none of you would dare take on, and this is the thanks I get? Alyssa stepped closer, her expression calm but unyielding. This isn't about thanks. It's about accountability. You don't get to hide behind years of service while treating people like suspects in their own homes. That's not leadership, that's control. The crowd shifted, some nodding subtly. The weight of Alyssa's words settled over the block. Keisha folded her arms and smirked. She's not wrong. If Geraldine really cared about this community, she would have walked up with a smile, maybe asked if we needed help with boxes. Instead, she dialed 911. That's not community spirit, that's pride and paranoia. Geraldine's lips trembled. For the first time, she looked less like the ruler of Desert Bloom and more like a woman cornered by the truth. The teenager, still hovering with his phone, finally chimed in. Mrs. Pruitt, you've been strict about my skateboard since the day I moved here. You even called my mom once because I left it by the sidewalk. But this is worse. This was humiliating. You owe her an apology. The statement drew gasps, a teenager calling her out in front of everyone. It was something unthinkable a week ago. But today, no one rushed to silence him. Geraldine's throat worked as she tried to respond, but all that came out was a weak, I was only protecting. No, Alyssa cut in firmly. You weren't protecting anything. You were protecting an image you built in your head about what this neighborhood should look like. And the truth is, I don't fit that image. That's the problem, isn't it? The silence that followed was deafening. Every neighbor knew the answer, even if Geraldine couldn't bring herself to say it. Her hand trembled as she adjusted her purse strap. She glanced around, hoping for someone, anyone, to step forward, to reaffirm her authority. No one did. Even the loyal ones kept their distance. For a long moment, she simply stood there, lips pressed tight, words locked behind clenched teeth. Then slowly, she turned and started back across the street, her heels clicking against the pavement as the sun dipped lower over the Arizona sky. The crowd outside slowly began to thin. Conversations drifted back toward small talk. Children were called inside for dinner, and sprinklers hissed to life across manicured lawns. Geraldine had disappeared behind her front door without another word, but her absence lingered heavier than her presence had. Alyssa exhaled deeply and turned toward the moving truck. For hours, she had been prepared to carry boxes, arrange furniture, and map out her new life. Instead, she had spent her first afternoon defending her right to exist on her own driveway. Keisha touched her arm gently. You still want to do this today? We can push it to tomorrow. No, Alyssa replied firmly, though her voice softened at the edges. If I stop now, it'll feel like she won something. This house is mine. I'm going to fill it tonight, even if it takes until midnight. That's the sister I know, Keisha smirked, popping the trunk of her SUV and hauling out a box marked kitchen. It wasn't long before footsteps approached. Justin, the young man with glasses, appeared at the edge of the driveway. His wife followed, toddler on her hip. Do you need help carrying some of this in? He asked carefully, as if worried about overstepping. Alyssa hesitated for a moment, pride warring with gratitude. Finally, she gave a small smile. That'd be great, thank you. Within minutes, others trickled in. The teenager who had been recording set his phone aside and grabbed a box labeled books. The young couple down the street showed up too, offering to carry chairs and a lamp. Even the older woman from the lawn chair eventually wandered over, quietly lifting a small box of linens. Alyssa didn't miss the symbolism. For all Geraldine's posturing about community standards, this was community. People lending their hands, their time, their presence. Inside the townhouse, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and new carpet. Boxes stacked against the walls quickly turned the living room into a maze. Keisha directed traffic with mock seriousness. Kitchen to the left, living room to the right, and anyone caught sneaking snacks before we unpack plates owes me $5. The teenager laughed. Fair enough. As they worked, conversation flowed more easily. Justin asked Alyssa about her service. She told him about nights in Qatar where the desert winds howled louder than engines, about mornings in Germany when she drank coffee from a tin mug before briefings. She didn't brag. She simply painted pieces of her life, showing them a woman who had lived far beyond the borders of Desert Bloom Drive. The young mother listened intently. That sounds exhausting and brave. I can't imagine doing that for so many years. It was hard, Alyssa admitted, sliding a box of books against the wall. But it taught me who I am. And now I'm trying to build something steady, something permanent. This house, it's part of that. Her honesty seemed to melt whatever doubt remained among her new allies. Keisha caught the exchange and grinned. Told you she's tougher than anyone you'll ever meet. For the first time all day, Alyssa felt warmth that wasn't just from the Arizona heat. She felt threads of belonging stitching themselves quietly into place. Still, the absence of Geraldine weighed at the edges. Even as laughter filled the living room and neighbors passed boxes hand to hand, Alyssa's eyes drifted to the window. But as the house quieted and the night settled in, Alyssa knew this was just the first battle. The true test of whether this neighborhood could change was still ahead. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, cutting across stacks of unopened boxes. Alyssa stirred awake on the living room couch, still surrounded by half-assembled furniture and the faint scent of cardboard. Her body ached from the long day, but her mind was clear. Keisha patted in from the kitchen, a mug of coffee in hand. Morning. You get any sleep? Some, Alyssa said, sitting up. Not enough. She rubbed her eyes. Every time I closed them, I saw her face. Geraldine standing there, like she had the right to erase me with one phone call. Keisha sighed and handed her the mug. Forget her. You showed her yesterday. Everyone saw it, did they? Alyssa asked quietly. She sipped the coffee, letting the heat steady her nerves. Some looked ashamed. Others just looked away. Silence doesn't mean they understood. It just means they didn't want to be part of it. The weight of her words settled between them, but before Keisha could reply, a knock echoed from the front door. Alyssa stiffened. If that's her again, Keisha muttered, but Alyssa raised her hand, walked to the door, and opened it cautiously. It wasn't Geraldine. It was Justin, holding a plate wrapped in foil. His wife stood beside him, toddler balanced on her hip. Sorry to bother you, Justin said with a sheepish smile. We figured after yesterday you probably didn't get a chance to eat much. We made too much breakfast. Thought you could use some. Alyssa blinked, then slowly smiled. That's thoughtful. Thank you. His wife added softly, we just want you to know, you're not alone here. Not everyone feels like Geraldine. For the first time since arriving, Alyssa felt her chest loosen. She took the plate, grateful. I appreciate this more than you know. After they left, Alyssa sat at the kitchen counter with Keisha. See? Keisha said, unwrapping the foil. That's proof they get it. Alyssa nodded, chewing slowly, her mind turning. Maybe, but Geraldine's not gone. She's probably already drafting a letter, finding some clauses in the HOA rules to wave over my head. I need to be ready for that. Keisha leaned back. And you will be. You always are. Later that afternoon, Alyssa stepped outside. The street was quieter than yesterday, but the memory still clung to the pavement. A few neighbors waved politely. Others avoided her gaze. The balance had shifted, but not entirely. Geraldine's blinds were drawn, but Alyssa felt her presence, heavy, watchful, unyielding. She knew there would be more encounters, more battles dressed up as standards, but she also knew something had changed. The spell of Geraldine's authority had cracked. People had seen her exposed, and once seen, that couldn't be unseen. Alyssa stood at the edge of her driveway, looking at the house she had fought for in more ways than one. She thought of the years spent overseas, The sacrifices, the oath she'd taken. She thought of the simple dream that had carried her through it all. A home, a place of her own, a community where she could breathe. Her voice was low, almost a whisper to herself. This is mine. No one can take it from me. The moral was clear to her now. Prejudice doesn't always wear the mask of open hostility. Sometimes it hides in positions of authority, in rules and procedures, in the everyday power people cling to. It can twist ordinary situations into public trials, but dignity, truth, and patience can strip it bare for everyone to see. That was the lesson of her first day in Scottsdale, that standing tall, even when you're alone, forces people to look closer. And when they look closer, they start to see what's real. That night, as Alyssa unpacked a box of framed photos, her squadron, her parents, her graduation from basic training, she placed them carefully on the mantel. Each picture was proof of the life she'd built, a life that no gate, no title, no HOA president could diminish. Keisha leaned against the wall, watching. You know what I think? What? Alyssa asked, adjusting a frame. I think yesterday was ugly, but maybe it cracked something open. Maybe it gave people a chance to see you, the real you. Alyssa smiled faintly. Then maybe it was worth it. She turned toward the camera of her mind's eye, the audience who'd been with her every step of this story. Her voice softened but carried strength. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never let someone else decide your worth. Stand firm in who you are. Respect yourself enough to demand respect from others. And when you see injustice, don't look away. Speak up. That's how change begins. She paused, then added with quiet conviction. And if you believe stories like this matter, share them. Talk about them. Subscribe so more people hear them, because we can't change what we stay silent about. Her words lingered like the glow of the setting sun on Desert Bloom Drive. Not final, not finished, but strong enough to carry into tomorrow. And tomorrow, Alyssa would still be here, standing tall, unmoved, home,